when I was given the opportunity to speak, I'm a bit of a shameless eclectic, and I undertake quite a range of social science research, but given the time of year, I thought it would be useful to reflect with you on some research I've been doing over the last 4 years with a colleague, Dr. Robin Kearns, who is currently based in Alberta in Canada, but he's an expat Kiwi. And he and I have been very curious about the issue of the New Zealand coast, and particularly the way in which people's attachment to the coast leads to mobilization around feelings and attachment around concern as to what is being lost, which things that might be lost. I want to start with, this is the only visual aid of this evening, so I had to show one terribly small black and white one that says, a bit of graffiti in Hawkes Bay, it says, "Leave it alone." And I think this is a very evocative statement to begin with that we can see replicated in the media quite often at the moment, particularly at the moment with New Chums Beach in Coromandel, a community that is rallying around people, hundreds gathering in a last-ditch protest to save a pristine, world-renowned Coromandel beach development. So clearly there is a considerable passion around the coast, and in fact I'm not a planner, but a coastal planner, Raewyn Peart, in her book called Castles in the Sand, states that New Zealanders are losing those things about the coast that they love the most. So it seems to me that one way of looking at the coast is to consider the sorts of development that have happened over the years. We've had in the over the second half of the 20th century a phase of Kiwi ingenuity, batch building, the emergence of camping as a family practice, a form of sort of banal domestic tourism. And then in the late 20th century, the emergence of the conservation ethic in New Zealand, a recognition of ecological sensitivity and rare species and various delicate landscapes that needed preservation, not for human use per se, but in their intrinsic right themselves. We also see the coast as a iconic sort of element of the New Zealand psyche, and this is where, as a geographer, I dwell as much in the world of arts as science. I'm a social scientist. I'm particularly interested in imaginaries, which is a term that we refer to the way that people construct their worlds collectively. And so in New Zealand literature we see novels that are set on the beach, into the golden weather. In a contemporary sense, Air New Zealand redesigning its coral lounges with batch-like furniture. I went to a play at the Basement in town earlier this year called I Love Camping. We have a sort of a re-emergence of a nostalgia around camping. Why? Because campgrounds are closing. There is this sense of a closing coast. And indeed, in work that we've undertaken over the last couple of years, one route to us trying to understand the issues around the coast is to analyse documentary sources, such as a documentary called The Last Resort that was came out about 3 years ago. And this involved some of the issues around the closure of the Blue Bay campground in Mahia Peninsula, where it was sold, subdivided, but 2 years later there were no houses there, there were simply trees cut down and roads put in. So it was in this context that Damien Collins and I began a excavation, if you like, thinking about a sort of an archaeological metaphor of the meaning of the coast in New Zealand, because it seemed to us we have quite extensive analyses from a historical and a planning and environmental defence perspective, and at the same time we have within our own parent discipline of geography the emergence of some very interesting theoretical perspectives. Here's a book called Emotional Geographies. I have a friend of mine who, if I utter the term emotional geography, says, "Oh, you geographers have just taken over the world, you know, nothing's sacred. You know, what'll be next? You know, emotional geographies, spiritual geographies, you might as well just call it, you know, the world of stuff, you own it all." But, you know, I do think that there is something here, and I hope tonight to be able to argue a case for emotional geographies of the coast. The beach and the coast is connected to nationhood. Think about the White Cliffs of Dover, or think about the images of Bondi Beach in Australia. And in New Zealand, what are the quintessential images of the coastline? They are wild, uncluttered beaches, the very sorts of beaches that we can see communities rallying around to protect. And so our exploration dealt with the nature of property rights and the way in which the coast is placed within advertising in New Zealand and the fate of traditional uses of the coast, such as campgrounds and bachelors. Key question: how do coastal communities subject to proposals for large-scale property developments understand and respond to the prospect of profound change? Now, profound change disturbs us all. What particular feelings underlie and mobilize change within communities that are faced with change? So 2 case study sites within our project. First of all, Ocean Beach, which is a place some of you might be familiar with, about 25 minutes drive from Hastings and Hawkes Bay. And secondly, Ngunguru on the northern coast, a little closer to here, not far from where I spent my childhood in the north. It's about 25 minutes from Whangarei. Both sites, one a sand spit in the case of Ngunguru, and in terms of Ocean Beach, a wild, undeveloped bit of coast, but not too far from a reasonable sized city. In both cases, proposals to build not just a few batches, but large-scale developments. In the case of Ocean Beach, there was a proposal placed in 2006 to build a 1,000-unit new urbanist development covering 140 hectares behind the dunes. In the case of Ngunguru, yes, there is a large batch community on the mainland side of the estuary, but looking out over the river, short distance away, an untroubled, uncluttered, unbuilt upon sandspit that has very sacred values to local Māori, many wahi tapu over there, rare species of birds, and no development at all. But unfortunately, or otherwise, that sandspit was sold 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, 1964, and ever since then there has been this niggling prospect of sale and building upon the sandspit. But both of those case study sites, so-called sort of hotspots of community resistance, considerable mobilization among the people who formed a group called Future Ocean Beach in defense of that site, and the Friends of the Ngunguru Sandspit in the north. I may not have got the name quite correct, but the cumulative resistance over a number of years where people have mined, not the sand dunes, but mined their own resources as a community, and in so doing, perhaps paradoxically, ended up with a much stronger community out of the resistance. Okay then, so I just want to, for a few moments, talk about our approach, because it seems to me one of the very useful opportunities that these occasions present is to be exposed a little bit to the way that different sorts of scientists think. Now, as a social scientist, we clearly are not out there measuring things with all the technical equipment that physical scientists do, you know, stream gauges or wind turbines or whatever. Basically, our data is talk, and our tools and our measurement tools are ourselves. Of course, there are elements of assistance along the way, but interpretive social science uses the raw data of what people say and undertakes a process known as triangulation that comes from surveying, where you are trying to get the coordinates of a certain point and you look towards that certain point from different vantage points and come up with an agreed upon distance. That is the way that interpretive social science works, and that's why it works best when you have 2 or more people, 2 or more researchers involved, because you independently read the text of what people have said to you and come up with the common themes, the discourses that lurk within what people say. It's like reading between the lines. The other key principle is, you might say, why did we only interview, I think it was 32 respondents in Ngunguru? You might say, well, that's not a representative sample, but we weren't trying to be representative. We were applying another key criterion of qualitative research. And that again uses a metaphor that comes from physical science. It is the criterion of saturation. So just as you might have a supersaturated solution that you put a little string into, remember those high school experiments with a crystal, and boom, it crystallizes around that string. So too with qualitative research, you use the principle of saturation. So when you get to the point of people no longer telling you anything new, once you get to number 30, 31, 32, oops, okay, here we go, talk to your collaborator, Damien, I don't think we've really got anything new coming here in the study. I think we'll just put a closure. This is the number. And a lot of it comes from professional judgment, having been involved in numerous studies over the years. The third important point I want to make about this sort of research, having talked about triangulation, having talked about saturation, is the importance of feedback. You cannot do parachute drop research. You parachute drop like during the war, you know, take a few pictures and run away. You can't do that. You have to be committed to a community and be willing to go back, front up, present those themes that you've identified, and be part of a discussion. In our case, community meetings, which we did earlier this year at Ngunguru. So feedback, returning information to the community.